Hi, first graders. Happy Wind Down Wednesday. I'm so glad you're here with us this evening. Find someplace cozy to sit and we will get started. February is Black History Month. Over the last couple of weeks, we have been learning about influential African Americans. We discussed in class what the word influential means. I encourage you to continue that discussion at home. This evening, we're going to listen to the story titled Rosa. It's written by Nikki Giovanni and illustrated by Brian Collier. It is a Caldecott Honor book, which means that it earned an award for its pictures. Down here, we can see that this book also earned the Coretta Scott King Award. We read another story in class called Each Kindness, and that book also earned this award. The Coretta Scott King Book Awards are given annually to outstanding African American authors and illustrators of books for children and young adults that demonstrate an appreciation of African American culture and universal human values. I'm excited to read this story with you. We have already discussed Rosa Parks. Let's learn a little bit more about her story. In class, we talked about the importance of keeping stories of influential figures alive by talking about them. In class, we made a connection about how we enjoy hearing the stories of people who are older than us. For example, many students in class shared that they like hearing about their parents' childhood or hearing from their grandparents about what life was like when they were younger. And the class agreed that if those stories were erased or not told, it would bother them. Rosa. Mrs. Parks was having a good day. Mother was getting over that touch of flu and was up this morning for breakfast at the table. Her husband, Raymond Parks, one of the best barbers in the county, had been asked to take on extra work at the Air Force Base. So a county is a town. Remember, our country is much bigger than a little town, right? Our country covers a big piece of land, and it's made up of 50 states. Do you remember what state we live in? Tell someone at home. So there was some extra work that Raymond Parks was taking on as a barber, a hairdresser at the Air Force Base. And the first day of December was always special because you could just feel Christmas in the air. Everybody knew the alterations department would soon be very, very busy. Mrs. Parks would laugh each year with the other seamstresses and say that those elves in the North Pole have nothing on us. So she's talking about how she works hard with her co-workers, the people that she works with, to do a lot of sewing. She's a seamstress. The women of Montgomery, both young and old, would come in with their fancy holiday dresses that needed adjustments, or their Sunday suits and blouses that needed just a touch, a flower or some velvet trimming, or something to make the ladies look festive. So Mrs. Parks and Mr. Parks have jobs where they are working hard, and it is December, or it's going to be December 1st. And that's a very busy time for Mr. and Mrs. Parks at their work. Rosa Parks was the best seamstress. The needle and thread flew through her hands like the gold spinning from Rumpelstiltskin's loom. The other seamstresses would tease Rosa Parks and say she used magic. So she was so good at her job that her co-workers, the people that she worked with, thought she was using magic. Rosa would laugh. Not magic, just concentration, she would say. Some days she would skip lunch to be finished on time. This Saturday, they had gotten a bit ahead of their schedule. "Why don't you go on home, Rosa?" said the supervisor. "I know your mother is feeling poorly, and you might want to look in on her." Oh, how kind of her supervisor to say, "The work is finished. Why don't you go home early?" The supervisor knew Rosa would stay until the work was done, but it was only December 1st. So now we know the date, the setting, the day, and time. We know it's December, and we know that it's probably a little bit later in the afternoon. The sky is still a little light. No need to push. Rosa appreciated that. Now she could get home early, and since Raymond would be working late, maybe she would surprise him with a meatloaf, his favorite. "See you in the morning." Rosa waved goodbye and headed for the bus stop. Raise your hand if you ride a bus to school or home from school. She fiddled in her pocket for the dime so that she would not have to ask for change. So she wanted to give the exact amount that was needed to ride the bus. A dime is worth 10 cents. When she stepped up to drop her fare or money in, like there's a box that she would put it in, she was smiling in anticipation and with excitement of the nice dinner she would make. But then she remembered a custom, a tradition, something that happens over and over again. And it is a custom that Rosa Parks does not enjoy. So she's thinking about this tradition, and she got off of the bus and went to the back door to enter the bus from the rear, the end of the bus. That is different. Let's read on to find out what happens next. Rosa saw that the section reserved for blacks was full, but she noticed the neutral section, the part of the bus where blacks or whites could sit, had free seats. The left side of the aisle had 2 seats, and on the right side a man was sitting next to the window. Rosa decided to sit next to him. She did not remember his name, but she knew his face. His son, Jimmy, came frequently to the NAACP CP Youth Council affairs. I want to strive for accuracy and make sure I tell you exactly what those letters stand for. So, let me tell you. So, I'm always remaining open to continuous learning. This is what NAACP stands for, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It was founded in 1909. So when Mrs. Parks saw Jimmy, she exchanged pleasantries, which means they greeted each other kindly. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Rosa settled her sewing bag and her purse near her knees, trying not to crowd Jimmy's father. So this is Jimmy's father. Jimmy is his son, and Rosa Parks knows Jimmy from the NAACP Youth Council meetings. Men take up more space, she was thinking as she tried to squish her packages closer. The bus made several more stops, and the 2 seats opposite her were filled by blacks. She sat on her side of the aisle, daydreaming about her good day and planning her special meal for her husband. Does anyone remember what it is that she wants to make for her husband? Meatloaf. I said, give me those seats, the bus driver bellowed. Mrs. Parks looked up in surprise. The 2 men on the opposite side of the aisle were rising to move into the crowded black section. Jimmy's father muttered, more to himself than anyone else, I don't feel like trouble today. I'm going to move. Mrs. Parks stood to let him out, looked at James Blake, the bus driver, and then sat back down. You better make it easy on yourself, Blake yelled. So Blake is the name of the bus driver. Why do you pick on us? Mrs. Parks asked, with that quiet strength of hers. I'm going to call the police, Blake threatened. Do what you must, Mrs. Parks quietly replied. Sounds like Mrs. Parks is staying calm, managing impulses, showing respect. She was not frightened. She was not going to give in to that which was wrong. Some of the white people were saying aloud, she ought to be arrested and take her off this bus. Some of the black people, recognizing the potential for ugliness, got off the bus. So they were noticing that some disagreements were happening, and they wanted to avoid it. They wanted to avoid any problems that could occur. So they got off the bus. Others stayed on, saying among themselves, that is the neutral section. She has a right to be there. Mrs. Parks sat. As Mrs. Parks sat waiting for the police to come, she thought of all the brave men and women, boys and girls who stood tall for civil rights. She recited or thought in her mind about the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, in which the United States Supreme Court ruled that separate is inherently unequal. She sighed as she realized she was tired. I wonder what kind of tired. Not tired from work, but tired of putting white people first, tired of stepping off sidewalks to let white people pass, tired of eating at separate lunch counters and learning at separate schools. We talked about segregation at school. During our conversation, we discussed how the world would not be very interesting if we were all the same. And just like in our classroom, the world is interesting because we are all different. And being together gives us an opportunity to learn about our differences and celebrate them. She was tired of colored entrances, which means entrances for only people who are Black, or colored balconies, which are balconies only for people who are Black, or colored drinking fountains, and colored taxis. She was tired of getting somewhere first and being waited on last, tired of separate, and definitely tired of not equal. She thought about her mother and her grandmother and knew they would want her to be strong. So she's thinking about their stories, their life stories. And she wants to continue on with being strong. She was ready for this moment. When the policeman bent down to ask, "Auntie, are you going to move?" all the strength of all the people through all those many years joined in her. That means she's thinking about her ancestors, all of the people who lived before her. Rosa Parks said no. Joanne Robinson was at the Piggly Wiggly when she learned of the arrest. She had stopped in to purchase a box of macaroni and cheese. She always served macaroni and cheese when she baked red snapper for dinner. A sister member of the Women's Political Council approached her just as she reached the checkout line. "Not Mrs. Parks," Mrs. Robinson exclaimed. She then looked around. "Pass the word that everybody should meet at my office at 10 o'clock tonight," she said. Mrs. Robinson was also Dr. Robinson, a professor at Alabama State, the college designated for colored people, and she was the newly elected president of the Women's Political Council. She rushed home to put dinner on the table, cleaned up the kitchen, and put the kids to bed. She kissed her husband goodnight and hurried to the college. It was dark when they finally gathered. I wonder what it is that they will discuss. The 25 women first held hands in prayer in hopes that they were doing the right thing. I wonder what it is that they will be doing. Let's read on to find out. After all, they were going to use the stencil maker, printer and paper of Alabama State without permission. So these women gathered at a college or a school, and they're using the supplies from that school without asking permission to do so. If they were caught at the college, they would all be arrested for trespassing, being someplace without permission. But they were working to compete against a vicious law, right? A law that separates people because of their skin color. They decided they would stand under the umbrella of courage Rosa Parks had offered. So they're thinking about how Rosa Parks was courageous, and they admire it and want to be courageous too. The women quickly formed groups to carry out each task. Making the stencils was the most difficult because the machine keys had to be struck very hard so that the letters would be clearly readable. They're thinking interdependently. If a mistake was made, the whole page had to be thrown out. It took a lot of concentration. Oh, they're also striving for accuracy. I wonder what it is that they are creating. The posters read, "No riders today. Support Mrs. Parks. Stay off the bus. Walk on Monday." We talked about the bus boycott at school. The women made enough posters for almost every citizen of color in Montgomery. The next morning, as people read the posters, they remembered the joy they felt when the Supreme Court, a very large court that makes very big decisions, they remembered when that court declared that separate was not equal. Separate water fountains based on what your skin color is, or certain restaurants that you can go into only if you are white, and certain restaurants you can go into only if you're black. So they were thinking about all that decision that the Supreme Court came up with when they saw all of these posters. They were sure that once the highest court in the land had spoken, they would not be treated so badly. But that was not the case, because they were finding we don't like being separate. We don't like having to do things and go places and not being with others who are a different skin color than us. Soon after the ruling, at that time, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy, was treated very violently, and his mother was very upset. Rosa wanted to make a difference. She was standing courageously, and people were ready to stand with her. They came together in a great mass meeting. The Women's Political Council, the NAACP, and all the churches. They needed someone to speak for them, to give voice to the injustice, the unfairness. Everyone agreed that the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. would be ideal, right? Just the right person. "We will stay off the buses," Dr. King intoned. "We will walk until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." So they will walk instead of go on the bus until a decision is made that is fair and the right thing to do. And the people walked. They walked in the rain. They walked in the hot sun. They walked early in the morning. They walked late at night. They walked at Christmas, and they walked at Easter. They walked on the 4th of July. They walked on Labor Day. They walked on Thanksgiving, and then it was almost Christmas again. They still walked. people from all over the United States, sent shoes and coats and money so that the citizens of Montgomery could walk. So people are supporting them. Everyone was proud of their nonviolent movement, and the sole force that bound the community together would sustain many marches for the years of struggle that were yet to come. On November 13th, 1956, almost a year after the arrest of Rosa Parks, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that segregation on the buses, like segregation at schools, was illegal. Segregation was wrong. Rosa Parks said no so that the Supreme Court could remind the nation that the Constitution of the United States makes no provision for second-class citizenship. We are all equal under the law and are all entitled to its protection. The integrity, the dignity, the quiet strength of Rosa Parks turned her no into a yes for change. Since she said no to moving where she was sitting on the bus, it became a yes for change for our country. Integrity. We focus a lot on that word in class. It means doing the right thing, especially when no one is watching. I enjoyed reading the story Rosa with you this evening, and I hope she inspires you to do the right thing in your own life. Thank you so much for being with me this evening. I will see you tomorrow.